One of the most visible signs of the shutdown have been the closed signs at national parks and monuments across the country. More than 400 parks remain closed, but over the weekend, 5 states put up the cash to open parks in their states. Arizona is going to spend $93,000 a day to reopen the Grand Canyon. Utah has put up $1.7 million to reopen 8 of the national parks in that state. And Colorado, still reeling from the lost tourism from last month's massive flooding, is spending $40,000 a day to reopen Rocky Mountain National Park until October 20th. Mount Rushmore is reopened to the tune of $15,000 a day. And in New York, the state will fork out $61,000 per day to reopen the Statue of Liberty through Thursday. Interior Department spokesman Blake Androff said the government had no plans to reimburse states that pay to reopen parks. Kristen Brengel is the legislative director of the National Parks Conservation Association, and she joins us via Skype from Odenton, Maryland. Kristen, thank you so much for taking a few minutes with us here at Arise America.
Thanks for having me.
You know, the national parks is one of those things that you don't really appreciate them until you don't have them. We kind of all take them for granted. Can you sort of take us through how many visitors enjoy our national parks and how much money is at stake here while they're closed?
Yes, about 300 million people visit our national parks every year. And during the government shutdown, we estimate about $30 million a day is being lost in local communities across the country due to the shutdown.
This has quite a ripple effect. It's not just the parks being closed for visitors, but what's the ripple effect for the local economy as well as the government employees that run those and maintain those parks?
Right. Sadly, the Park Service had to send home about 86% of their staff. They're officially furloughed. So only essential staff are in the park to keep the park safe. So we're seeing a massive reduction in the 24,000 staff who are normally in the national parks. And for local communities, this is a pretty incredible and devastating impact. There are many gateway communities, we call them, places that you go and you stay in a hotel before you arrive in a park. All of those places, when the park shuts down, they have to essentially shut down. They don't need to shut down, but the tourists aren't coming, so they're not putting any heads in beds and feeding people in restaurants, so they suffer, probably even greater than the national parks do.
I know that you represent, although you all are not a part of the federal government, you represent these national parks with your organization. What do you think about this trend of the states that we just reported that have decided to use state funds to reopen their parks and open them to the visitors? Is that a good idea in your estimation?
Well, the reason we have our national parks is so we can celebrate our culture, our heritage. So getting people into national parks is something that our organization very much supports. So these Band-Aid efforts to have states fund the Park Service staff coming back on board so that we can let visitors in, it's a good thing that people can get back into our parks, but it's not going to address the overall budget issue at stake here, which is these are just a couple of parks that are reopened, but there are 401 units of the national park system, and largely all of them are closed right now. So it's a Band-Aid for some parks. We're glad some of those parks are open temporarily, but it's very temporary.
I think some of these states are counting on, or at least holding out the hope that they might get the money back that they're going to spend to reopen their parks. Do you think that's likely?
It's hard to predict what Congress is going to do these days, to be honest with you. I've been lobbying for about 14 years here in this town, and it's difficult to pass a bill. So I don't think there's a guarantee right now that states will get reimbursed. We don't even know if staff are going to get reimbursed for their time away from the park. So it's questionable right now, but hopefully they do.
You know, there have been some states that have opted not to use state funds, whether they have them or not, to open their parks. Governor of Wyoming, in fact, Matt Mead, said that Wyoming can't afford to bail out the federal government. Is that a harsh stance by your estimation?
No, states are struggling in this economy just as much as the federal government is and have to make these tough calls. Luckily, Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks, they actually shut down for the winter around this time, so they can make sort of a judgment call on timing. But But it's a tough decision for everybody because you have to weigh the tourist season, how much money the gateway communities are making, and whether you can really afford it in your state budget. But everyone's hurting right now. That's a fact.
Yeah, things are tough all over for sure. Kristen Brengel, thank you so much for taking some time with us.
Thank you.
Well, as I just mentioned, Wyoming is one of the states that has said it cannot afford to bail out the federal government. The area around Jackson Hole is home to Yellowstone National Park and the Grand Teton National Park. Mark Barron is the mayor of the town of Jackson, Wyoming, and he joins us via Skype from Jackson. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for taking some time with us.
Thank you, Debbie.
Tell me a little bit about how this shutdown, which then, of course, closed our national parks, has affected the economy there.
Well, it's been devastating, Debbie. We have visitors from around the world, international visitors, Beijing, Japan, who have spent a large amount of money to come and see Yellowstone National Park or Grand Teton National Park, and they're finding gates and barricades and uniformed enforcement officers keeping them out. I think it's a terrible image for America.
You know, I think other than and it's not but in addition to the economic devastation of closing these parks, having to turn visitors away, isn't there an emotional or psychological component for you as well? I mean, the nature is a part of who you are out there in Wyoming.
We're a gateway to community to Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Park, and we host with pride about 3.5 million summer visitors through our national park system. We take a great deal of pride as stewards of the environment here and the wildlife here, and we are literally the home of the most prolific wildlife in the lower 48, the Serengeti of the lower 48. So yeah, we're embarrassed for our visitors who come out here and against barricades. You can't drive through our national parks, you can't bicycle through our national parks, and you may not walk through our national parks. It makes you wonder whose national parks these are, Debbie.
Do you think the businesses that thrive off of the tourism of the parks, how much longer will they be able to hold out, do you think?
I think that, when the park closes down for a couple of weeks, when you're in prime time of October. In October, we get, 140,000 visits to Yellowstone. So that's not small. And, for our hotels, restaurants, retail shops, our wildlife tours, they aren't covered by a furlough. They've been hammered very, very hard. Massive rooms reservations have been canceled. Restaurants are becoming empty. The retail sector in downtown Jackson is a ghost town. It's really devastating. And for our community, it's embarrassing.
I'm sure, indeed. There was a special event you guys had been planning. As I understand it, you invested $500,000 in the plan of this to attract tourism to Yellowstone and Teton County. And as a result of this shutdown, you sent the letters to President Obama, to Speaker Boehner. Did you hear back from anybody, get any reaction at all?
Not at this time. I hope we do, though. We sent letters to our delegation in Wyoming as well. But I think it's important that the President, the Speaker of the House, and President of the Senate, as well as our congressional delegation, hear from us, hear from the local people who are being affected by this. Our jobs aren't going to get back pay.
I'm just wondering how you feel, Mr. Mayor, about your governor saying that the state won't bail out the federal government, considering the income that you're losing by having those parks closed. Do you agree with him?
I do agree. I agree with Governor Meade. And in fact, when the sequester hit in the spring, the towns of Jackson and Cody, through the governor's office and through the superintendent in Yellowstone's office, agreed that our two communities would pay to snowplow Yellowstone so that the national park would be open on time in early May, which made a huge difference for our local business. But at some point, you have to beg the question, how many times does the taxpayer have to pay to get the national parks open? The government shutdown is pure folly. The administration is the head of the Department of Interior, and I rest them with the responsibility of closing America's national parks and national monuments to vehicle traffic, foot traffic, and bicycle traffic. This is needless. And as I said, our community is fairly embarrassed by it.
All right, Mayor Mark Barron, Mayor of Jackson, Wyoming, I want to thank you so much for taking some time with us.
Thank you.